So, I already knew that I wasn't really gonna fuck with Monster, the Ed Gein story, pretty much immediately upon when it was announced, and mostly for personal reasons. For a year and a half, I have been working on a very long video exploring the ways in which the Ed Gein case has been historically narrativized, especially trying to correct the large amount of misinformation that prevails around it. So, this series coming out at this particular moment, for me, feels like I am a mortician who was given a very, very mangled body, and it was my job to put the body back together in a way that somewhat resembled the person that the body used to carry around. Kind of like the Gould Funeral Home did for Bernice Worden so that she could have an open casket funeral, which Monster did not depict, but oh well. But then, while I was standing over top of the body, trying to make sure that I got every hair in every place and that everything was together in a way that made sense and looked normal and reasonable, suddenly Ryan Murphy just burst into the mortuary, chopped off the leg, put a wig on it, started waving it around in the village square, and then, for no reason, called out a troupe of conventionally attractive men ages 30 to 45 and had them pull down their pants and moon anyone who was walking by. So my first priority in this scenario was I would like the leg back so that I can continue my work. And that is what my video reaction series to the show was. I think that I was reasonably concerned that the popularity of this show might affect the general understanding that most of the public had about this case, because this is the biggest piece of Ed Gein related media that's been released this century, so this is probably going to be what a lot of people think of when they think of that case, and that was a little concerning to me, and I wanted to address it. So that's what I did. I made multiple videos reacting to the show, just trying to fact check it from a historical perspective, but at some point, you do get kind of curious about why someone decided to run around the village holding a leg with a wig on it. What does that person think that they're doing, and why are they doing it? So I decided that I was gonna do an overview video where I wasn't fact-checking stuff so much as just talking about my general thoughts of the show, and I did make some notes for that, but my notes, when I started making them, they primarily centered around comparing this new season to the first two seasons of Monster, the seasons about Dahmer and the Menendez brothers, but I started to find that angle a little unsatisfying. I think there are definitely worthwhile comparisons to make, especially for seasons 1 and this new season, because Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Gein are somewhat similar as criminals, so there were things done in the first season that I can't really understand why they weren't also done in this new season. But when I really started thinking about it, I was like, well, I don't think that the first two seasons are comparable fully to this new entry into this anthology series. While seasons 1 and 2 do have a lot of problems, especially in the context of the cases that they are attempting or claiming to depict, they're not very accurate, but they are still dramatizations. They could be properly classified as that. They take these true stories and then they follow the basic beats of the real life case. Season 2 has a lot of problems especially, but those problems don't include showing the Menendez brothers killing people that we don't have any evidence that they actually killed. And now, in my video reactions, I did address the fact that I kept referring to the show as a Ryan Murphy production, even though it is Ian Brennan who is the main creative force for this season. Now, I defended that as It's still a Ryan Murphy production, he's still the producer, and ultimately, him and Ian have been working together for a very long time, so Ian is just kind of following the house style, and it is still very much a Ryan Murphy show. I mean, when they show it on Netflix, it says Ryan Murphy production, so I do still think it's fair to blame Ryan Murphy for this, but given how different it is from seasons 1 and 2, I think at this point, I do have to start referring to the creator here as being Ian Brennan. Ian is the one that came into my mortuary. Ryan is just the person that, gave him the keys. And probably also supplied the troop of men. But still, the decision to put the wig onto the leg, that was Ian. So I decided that I needed to think of this show again, not as a dramatization, but just as a show. Already, I do think that's sort of stupid because it is very much marketed as a dramatization. It is literally called Monster, the Ed Gein Story, and it also is season 3 of a series where the first 2 seasons were dramatizations. So this idea that anyone who's complaining about the show is just upset that it's not a documentary or whatever, and they don't understand how fictionalized narrative true crime works. It's no, that's not the case. It's just that the show was marketed as if it was an actual dramatization, which it's not. But okay, I'll let it go. That still doesn't change the fact that I don't know what this show is doing. I kept thinking about, what would I think of this show if I didn't think about it through the lens of someone that knows about Ed Gein? If I was just watching it as a show or just as a true crime show, would this make any sense to me? And I think the answer, from what I've seen from a lot of other people, does seem to be no, which is sort of validating to me. But when I was trying to make my notes for this video, I still just felt but I still looked at it the first time through the lens of someone who was trying to do fact-checking for the Ed Gein case. And I don't really have that much perspective on it other than that. There's a whole lot of the show that I wasn't even really paying attention to because it was completely irrelevant to the thing that I was here to talk about. So, I, unfortunately, made the decision that I needed to watch the show again, all the way through, and I needed to do it not filming myself, just in the privacy of my own home, and I needed to watch it, crucially, on 1x speed, which I really, really did not like doing. But I did do it. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna turn off the Ed Gein fact-checking part of my brain, and I'm gonna turn on the former film student part of my brain. And what did I do when I was in college and I was watching movies and trying to provide some kind of analysis on them? I took notes during my watching. So that's what I did. I thought about putting these notes into a more coherent structure so that this video isn't super weird and rambly and incoherent, but you know what? They didn't bother to do that for the show, so fuck it. We're just gonna go through my notes and I'm just gonna say what I think about whatever the fuck this was. Now, I wanted to go into this without doing any sort of additional research. Obviously, even if I'm turning off the fact-checking part of my brain for Ed Gein, I still do know a lot about the case, so I can't erase that from my brain. But I didn't want to do any sort of research into all the other stuff that the show is acknowledging, covering, showing, exploiting, I don't know, whatever you call it. I didn't want to do any extra research into that, and I also didn't want to do any research really into the production of the show either. And it's a little challenging because there's a lot of stuff on the show where I can't really tell if certain things are intentional or if it's just a problem of having a really rushed production. For instance, is the sound design that bad on purpose? I didn't really notice it when I was doing my reaction, because again, I was just so focused on the Ed Gein stuff, but I noticed it pretty quickly when I was doing my rewatch, and once I noticed it, I couldn't unnotice it. The sound design is bad, and it's not bad in a way that makes me think that someone who doesn't have professional experience did it. Like, I can tell that professionals did it, it just feels incomplete. The biggest problem is that most scenes are weirdly quiet. Like the scene where Ed is proposing to Adeline in the cemetery, you don't really hear a whole lot outside of just them talking. You can maybe hear like a little bit of wind, and every once in a while you'll hear like a really faint owl in the background, but there's no like insect noises, there aren't any other sort of birds, the wind itself isn't very prominent, you don't hear stuff like going through trees at all, which I guess maybe you could make the argument that the cemetery is in a kind of more field-like area where there aren't a whole lot of trees, but like you hear stuff when you're outside. There's noises outside, and there's just not enough noises in this cemetery.
Yeah, the lady's fingers were a lot fatter than yours.
Whose?
The lady that sold it to me.
It's a diamond. And what are those? Emeralds?
Mm-hmm.
And also, the cemetery scenes a lot of the time just look kind of cheap, and in a way that I actually think works fairly well. Like, it looks kind of Halloween B-movie-ish. It looks like a set. It doesn't look like a real cemetery. It looks like a set a lot of the time, and especially there's that part where Ed has the moon behind him, where that fully just looks like a painted moon that they just like put behind him. And I think that kind of works if we're doing this whole what's real, what's fake thing, because it is drawing attention to the artificiality of it. You know, it looks like a set. It looks like it maybe is even on a stage in some way. So is that why the sound design is so incomplete, that we're supposed to feel like these are just two actors talking? Because if that's the case, then why isn't it more obvious? You know, like, why do I still hear a little bit of wind and like a faint owl in the background? Why isn't it completely silent? Or why is the sound design not just so obvious and cartoonish that it's still clear? It just kind of feels like whoever was doing the sound design just put down one layer and ran out of time to do the rest. I don't know that I can really give this show enough grace to say that that was done intentionally, but there are other things where I felt that way at first, and then eventually I was like, actually, no, that might be intentional. For instance, pretty much the entire show takes place seemingly in one winter. The timeline of events here doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I know we've decided the real case doesn't matter that much, but I do think it's worth pointing out that all of the crimes that Ed committed that are shown on the series, that's all stuff that happened from like 1944 to when he was arrested in 1957. That's a 13-year gap that the show is covering, and yet it seems to take place in about a week. There's no real indicator of any time passing. The only time there is an indicator is when Frank Warden comes to the Warden hardware store and finds the crime scene, and when he walks into the back, there's a candle that got lit in the scene where Ed killed Bernice, and that candle goes out right when Frank walks back there, implying that the amount of time that's passed between when Bernice was shot and when Frank is finding this crime scene is the time it takes for that candle to burn all the way through. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense logically, since in that time it definitely seems like multiple days have passed because Ed killed 2 more people. Adeline went to Eleanor Adams' house. Eleanor died. Adeline then convinced Ed to steal Eleanor's body, and then Adeline went to New York and came back. All that's passed by the time that Frank finds his mother. For sure, multiple days. So that doesn't make sense, but then I guess you could make the argument of like, well, that's the clue that the timeline doesn't make sense, and this is all jumbled up and confusing on purpose. And then it's like, why? But then also, it's not that way through the entire show, which is the annoying part. For one thing, while we're shown most of the current events in the series in the winter, there is a flashback at one point to when George Gein leaves the Gein farmhouse, and it's never clarified, by the way, if he died or if he just left, like just walked out. I mean, I think you could even really interpret it as he went into the barn because that's where Augusta told him to go, is like, go sleep in the barn. So it's like, am I supposed to believe that George Gein was just in the barn the whole time? Or am I supposed to think that he died? Or am I supposed to think that he just left the family? Like, what's up with that? But more importantly, when he walks outside, and it's a very brief shot, it looks like summer outside, and it looks intentionally like summer, not just like the snow melted and maybe it's still winter. No, it looks like summer. So that's the one indication that, like, the actual timeline of the crimes is what we are supposed to be looking at within this winter universe. Everything that happens in relation to Henry Gein dying and then Ed's arrest, that all take place in the winter. So that's an indication that that's the timeline we're working with for the murders. And maybe the show is trying to imply that that actually doesn't matter, that that's not the real timeline. But then why, when it cuts to Frank Warden being an alcoholic after the death of his mother, and then going into the Washera County Police Station and talking to Sheriff Schley, it opens that scene with a title card thing that says 1958 on it. So I am supposed to pay attention to the timeline, even though 1958 actually doesn't mean anything with what the show showed us thus far. It's never established what date anything prior to that point is taking place in. So when it tells me that it's 1958, my first question is, what does that mean? Because I know, as someone who actually knows stuff about the Ed Gein case, I know that he was arrested in 1957, and I know what happens in 1958. So when I see the title card, I'm like, okay, I get where we're at in the story now. They never established that anything happened in 1957. There's nothing telling us that 1957 is when Ed was arrested, so if you're just an audience member watching the show, 1958 doesn't mean anything to you. That could be 5 years after Ed's arrest. It could be a week after his arrest, depending on, I guess, what month you're supposed to believe his crimes took place in, which very well could be December, since all you see is snow on the ground. Even still, though, I just can't understand why the showrunners wanted you to not know when any of these events were taking place, because I think that's still just really ineffective from a storytelling standpoint. One of the ways that they're trying to humanize Ed is by emphasizing his loneliness, but in the show, his loneliness is never really explored. I mean, for one thing, you see him talking to so many different people. Like, at the beginning, he's talking to the guy in the diner, and they seem to know each other. Like, they're having a back and forth. He seems familiar with Ed. Ed seems familiar with him. And then when he goes to Mary Hogan's tavern, she also seems familiar with him. Like, she knows stuff about him. She knows that he's dating Adeline Watkins. Mary also gets referred to as Ed's friend. When he's in Bernice Warden's shop, she says something about, you're the only person who's ever nice to me. So it's like, okay, so Bernice also has a familiarity with Ed. She's hung out with him or like seen him. He's been in her store. He's been nice. And then also when the cops are investigating Mary Hogan's death, they're talking to the last guy who saw her alive. And he says that he saw Ed's truck pull up as he pulled away from the tavern. But then he says, but Eddie Gein wouldn't do it. He wouldn't hurt a fly. So that guy knows who Ed is too. And then there's also a point where they say the thing about him bringing venison to people's houses. It shows a flash of him inside a person's house and even like having dinner with that family. So like, it seems like he has a fairly active social life from what's being shown on the screen. And then also, of course, there's Adeline Watkins. But the show is trying to make you think that he's been so lonely since his mom died, even though his mom only died like a couple days before it seems like the rest of the events in the show happened. So I don't think he really did spend that much time alone. And if you're trying to tell me that he did, I think you should probably want to emphasize the amount of time that's passed between a lot of these scenes. Because everything is all jumbled together, I never get the sense that Ed is a lonely person. He seems fine. And then I think maybe you could make the argument that, like, the perpetual winter thing is supposed to be just part of the setting of Plainfield or something, that you're supposed to feel like he's out in the middle of nowhere and it's hard and cold, ironically, for later things. And you're supposed to like be like, oh, the harsh winter of Wisconsin. But the thing is like, again, they don't ever show that. It never even portrays Ed's house as being out in the middle of nowhere to a sufficient degree. He fast travels everywhere. Like, where the fuck is Adeline's house in relation to Ed's? He is constantly just walking back and forth between her house and his, and she also, at one point, walks home from his house. It's not like treated as a big deal at all. So I don't feel like Ed is that far out of town, and also every time they show the town, it doesn't seem... Well, I don't even know. I can't even say that it doesn't seem that small. It doesn't seem like anything, because they don't show the town, really. They never explore it at all. You see Ed in a few different locations, like the roller skating rink, and then the diner, and then maybe, I couldn't quite tell if the diner and the pharmacy were separate, or if that was the same thing, but he mostly spends his time, like, in there, and then he goes to Mary's Tavern, which is in Pine Grove in real life, but in the show, that's not distinguished. It's treated as if it was in Plainfield, and specifically in Waushara County, because the Waushara County police show up to investigate it. But so that is also, like, it's shown on a street with other businesses, which is not true to real life. Like, it was in the middle of a field in real life. And I feel like if you wanted to make the land of Plainfield and the place that Ed lived in feel like really harsh and isolated and cold, then put Mary's Tavern in a fucking field. And also the Evelyn Hartley thing too, that happened in La Crosse. So like, why is Ed there? That's a 2-hour drive currently. It's a 2-hour drive right now. It was probably a longer drive back then, but they put them all into one thing is because they're not interested in Plainfield. I think that was the thing that was the most apparent to me watching the show, and especially rewatching it and comparing it to the first 2 seasons of Monster. Ian Brennan is just completely uninterested in Plainfield as a place, as a community. He doesn't care that much about Wisconsin or rural Wisconsin especially. It's just kind of like, oh, this is just like, here's the name of the town. We'll mention it every once in a while. And maybe you'll like see some stores, but you never get a sense of the town as like a living thing, as a character within the show, which is like really where the bad sound design comes in the most. When Ed's in the cemetery and you can't hear as much like insects and stuff as you probably should, it's like, okay, whatever. Where it feels really, really strange is when he's in places with a lot of other people around. And it's not even just him. It's not just Ed, so we can't even do this whole thing about like, oh, that's just from Ed's perspective. No, there are many, many scenes in the show where Ed is not there, and yet you can't really hear people. There are people around in the background, like at the roller skating rink or like at a restaurant or in just town, just people walking by. There's one point where it shows Anthony Perkins in a city, and you can't really hear many people from that either. You hear like a little bit of murmuring in the background.
Tooth Psycho?
But you never get a sense that there are other people living in this reality. It's just so isolated. Every part of it is just like, there's not a world around these characters whatsoever. And it feels very strange. Number one, because I don't think that the first 2 seasons of Monster had that problem. Season 2 is obviously, it has a lot of issues, but one of the things it does really well is it does just have this vibe of like 1980s Los Angeles. It is very interested in the setting that the Menendez brothers case took place in. It uses it against them in some not great ways, but it's still, I feel like it's set in Beverly Hills. I feel like it's set in Los Angeles in the 1980s. And the same thing with Milwaukee in the first season of Dahmer. It feels like Milwaukee is a real place. I went back and I rewatched the first like 2 episodes. In episode 2 of Dahmer, after Dahmer is arrested and the police are like carrying stuff out of the apartment, much to the way that people were carrying things out of Ed Gein's house and discovering all these terrible things that he had done, you see a shot of people on the street looking at it, like people who lived in that apartment building or in that neighborhood, and those aren't characters. Those aren't people that you have names of that you're supposed to be keeping track of their actions. Those are just people reacting to what they're seeing. So in that way, Milwaukee feels so much more alive in season 1 of Dahmer than Plainfield feels in the Ed Gein story, which is just extra ironic since Plainfield was way more affected by this case than any of the other locations they've shown in these other serial killer, or not serial killer, because the Menendez aren't serial killers, but like in these 2 other seasons that they've done. The setting isn't as impacted. Obviously, the setting of Beverly Hills, Los Angeles is important to the Menendez brothers story. That is a part of the interest people had in it. That's important to the way that it's being portrayed in the show. The fact that these are like rich Beverly Hills kids, that does matter to the case itself. The Menendez brothers case, though, doesn't matter that much to Beverly Hills or to Los Angeles. Like, if you were gonna make a list of, like, top 50 things that you think of when you think of LA, Menendez brothers probably won't be there, you know? LA just has a lot of other stuff going for it. It's never gonna be referred to as the home of the Menendez brothers. Milwaukee was obviously much more affected by the crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer because it is a much smaller city, but it is still a city, you know? It has a population of a couple 100,000 people, and it also has, you know, multiple universities, multiple museums. It has a Major League Baseball team. It's known for a lot of other stuff besides being the home of Jeffrey Dahmer. I went to the Wikipedia page just to see if Jeffrey Dahmer was even mentioned. He's not. You know what is mentioned? Red Letter Media, the YouTube channel. So, like, yeah, obviously, Milwaukee has a history with Jeffrey Dahmer, and it does kind of haunt the city to a fairly significant degree, but not to the degree that the Ed Gein case, the case of the Butcher of Plainfield, affects the town of Plainfield. I mean, at the time that the crimes happened, there was only a little over 600 people in that town. Actually, not even a town, it's a village. Technically, it's a village. It's not even big enough to be a town. A little over 600 people in that village, and then even now it only has a little over, or I think less than like 1,000 people. It's still very, very small. So not only did they have even more grief, more like communal grief over the death of one of their citizens because so many people in the town knew her. Bernice Worden was one of the most popular members of Plainfield. Many, many people in that town had to grieve that in a way that, like, you know, there's just a little bit more anonymity in a city like Milwaukee where it's not gonna affect, I mean, I guess he did kill more people, so maybe, but you know what I mean? Like, there's not as much, like, communal grief throughout the entire city. But then also, on top of it, of course Milwaukee has problems when it comes to the dark tourism industry and the people who want to come see all the, like, places that Jeffrey Dahmer went, like the bar that he picked men up in, the apartment that he lived in, though I don't know if it's still there. You know, like, there are monuments that people on some sort of true crime tour can go on related to Jeffrey Dahmer within the city of Milwaukee. And that is, you know, it happens. And it is probably pretty fucking annoying to the people that live there. But still, in a city of hundreds of thousands of people, stuff like that isn't going to be as disruptive to the city as a whole as true crime tours are in Plainfield, where they have less than 1,000 people. They're noticing you going into their cemetery. They're noticing you going onto the old Ed Gein property and getting dirt from it. Like, people know what you're doing, and they don't want you to do it. Because a lot of those people are people that have like historical ties to that town, you know? Those are people that like their grandparents lived there at the time that Ed did those things. There is a lot of generational trauma in Plainfield that is just not comparable to any of these other places that these crimes have taken place in. This season is going to have a more direct effect on more people than the first two seasons did, because reinvigorating the Ed Gein case in the popular consciousness is going to encourage people to go to Plainfield. Like, this entire thing being made into a Netflix show and being like one of the biggest shows on the platform this past week, that is gonna get more people into Plainfield digging up their fucking dirt. They don't want it. Like, I'm not against people making Ed Gein content in general. Obviously, I'm not. I'm fucking doing it myself. But the way that you do it does matter. If you're not humanizing the people of Plainfield, if you're not treating that town like a real fucking town with real fucking people in it, you're going to encourage even more ghoulish behavior from the people who go into that town on some fucking dark tourism trip. Like, you have to show the people of Plainfield as people. You have to show them being hurt by the stain that this crime has put onto their community. Otherwise, you're just being a fucking monster, ironically. You're just setting this town up to be treated as a fucking tourist spot. And it makes worse television. The fact that I don't feel like Plainfield is a real town while watching this show is just not satisfying as an audience member, especially as an audience member that knows the real story, that knows that there is something more interesting there about the grief that Plainfield had from the death of Bernice Worden, the annoyance, the frustration, the rage, the, again, grief that they had from the way that people just crowded into their town to go look at this, like, death house or whatever. Like, there's something very human there that if you're doing these sorts of true crime documentaries, or not documentaries, but dramatizations, these true crime narratives, there's something there that you would think that you would want to explore because it makes the story more interesting and more horrific. When you actually, like, really think about what that town had to go through. I mean, for one fucking thing, they act in the show like there wasn't ever a trial for Ed Gein at all. There was. And then the judge from the case wrote a book about the case and then published photos of Bernice Worden's body in his book that had never been seen before. They had never been made public after like 20 years after it happened. No one had seen those photos until the fucking judge on the case put them in his book, and not even just in the book. He put one of the photos on the back of the book jacket to sell it. That's insane. Same thing with that sedan they had Frank Worden driving around town in for some fucking reason, calling it the Ghoul of Plainfield car. That part is somewhat true. Obviously, Frank Worden didn't do it, and it's a weird thing to imply that he did. But the car was bought at that auction that Frank Worden did not run. It was bought at the auction, and then it was taken to county fairs across Wisconsin until it eventually started to get banned from all county fairs in Wisconsin because people kept complaining about it. The car got put on display as an exhibit. One of its first fair exhibits, by the way, kicked out a different exhibit from the Wisconsin, like, mental health thing. Like, there was some sort of association, University of Wisconsin mental health thing that was going to have a presentation at the county. They got kicked out of the fair because they ran out of space for the car so that they could put the car on display. Like, that's crazy. And that says something if you wanted to have some commentary there about, like, true crime and the way that it affects people and the monstrous ways that we focus on these crimes instead of actually focusing on things like mental health care that could maybe help prevent things like that from happening if we gave a shit about it. There's something there that I would think that this show would want to explore, but it doesn't. But even just from the base, like, horror of it, the car had wax figures inside of it. You had to like pay money to go look inside this car in the window. They had wax figures meant to represent Ed and his victims with like the victims' body parts and fake blood. Like it was horrible. And it was in the state that those crimes took place in. Like, people who went to those fairs were like, what the fuck? I knew those people. You don't want to show any of that? You didn't want to show the house burning down? The house burned down because it was going to be put up for auction, and a whole bunch of people, even up to that point, in the months between Ed's arrest and when the house burned down, people kept coming onto the property, trying to get a good look at it, trying to like break into it. People were trying to throw keg parties inside of it. It was really overwhelming for the community. It was also overwhelming for the police that didn't have staff to like put security around it 24/7. And then they found out that at the auction, there was gonna be some people that wanted to buy it, or at least this was the rumor. There were gonna be people who wanted to buy it and turn it into a museum of the morbid is what they called it. People in Plainfield freaked out. They were like, what the fuck? We're never gonna get rid of this if we don't do something about this fucking house. And then in the middle of the night, somehow it caught fire. They don't know who did it. And the police were even somewhat transparent about the fact that like, yeah, it was probably arson, but we don't know. And they never really like investigated that hard because the community consensus was just kind of like, technically burning down a house is illegal, but thank you to the person who did that. That was really, really cool of you.
The fire department, I think it was the slowest they ever went to a fire because everybody in Plainfield wanted that house burnt down because there was a man that wanted to buy the farm and turn it into a museum-like or sightseeing for people and charge to get in the house. So we were all happy that it was burned down. And no big investigation was made of it because we wanted the house gone.
None of that gets portrayed in the show at all? You just show the house burnt? You don't show it catching fire? All of that happens off screen and we're never given an explanation for what happened? Like, why? I don't know why the show is just completely disinterested in Plainfield as a place, as a community, but it clearly is, and it also is like super belittling to them in a way where it's like, again, I can't tell if this is on purpose or not. Because there's the part where Adeline goes to New York. She's always been a small town girl. She decides to go to the big city. She wants to make a name for herself, whatever. She goes to New York, and then she keeps complaining about how cold it is there. And I mentioned this in my reaction videos because I was like, what? That doesn't even make any sense. New York City is not colder than the area of rural Wisconsin that Adeline comes from. And I understand that I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that, like, the cost of living in New York is so high that she can't afford a heated apartment, but the building she's in is still heated. Like, it is definitely implied that other apartments in the building do have heat. Even if Adeline's apartment is really cold, it's not going to be colder than it is outside. And Adeline, when she was in Plainfield, was spending all of her time with Ed Gein in his house that doesn't even have electricity. On average, I looked it up because I was like, am I crazy or is New York just not as cold as Wisconsin? I looked it up. The area of Wisconsin that Adeline is from is 20 degrees colder in the winter than New York City on average. So like, yeah, Adeline is used to the cold. I mean, at one point, she walks out of Ed's house and then I guess just walks home and she's not even wearing a coat. She is holding a coat and there is snow on the ground. Adeline Watkins is used to the fucking cold. It doesn't make any sense that she went to New York City and was like, oh my God, I've never been cold like this. It's stupid. But it's like, why? Of all the things that you could have done, you can portray the cost of living being too high in so many ways that don't involve temperature. So it's very interesting to me that they chose that thing in particular to be like, oh, she's too cold for city life, as their way to belittle her. Because I know that it sounds like I'm being really nitpicky here and being like, oh, it's 20 degrees colder on average, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I am being a little nitpicky, but the point of those scenes is that Adeline can't cut it in New York. She's just this naive little Wisconsin small town girl, and she doesn't have what it takes to make it in the rough, cold city. Are they doing that on purpose? Are they trying to be belittling toward Plainfield on purpose? Because that is kind of what happened in real life when people found out about this case, when reporters became aware of it. A whole bunch of reporters, about like 60 of them from city publications, swarmed into Plainfield so that they could report on this story. And a lot of the locals were really upset about it because all these reporters came from big cities and they were kind of condescending and rude to them. And they kept like publishing stuff and taking things out of context. That is literally just what happened to Adeline Watkins and how she got labeled Ed's fiance, is that some fucking city reporter came in, asked Adeline Watkins some questions, she answered them. They then took the thing she was saying out of context, added a whole bunch of weird shit to it, and then was like, she was Ed's former sweetheart. And then Adeline had to go to a local paper and be like, what the fuck? That's not true. They took what I was saying out of context. And a lot of other people had similar complaints that, like, yeah, we talked to these reporters that just came in from like Chicago or Minneapolis or whatever, and they just completely twisted our words, and we don't know what to do now. That's what happened to Plainfield, and that's part of why we don't have a whole lot of information around the case, because Plainfield just got so sick of it that they stopped answering questions from anything other than like local sources. So the whole town got closed off because of the ways that these big city reporters were treating the locals. So it's like, is the Netflix show being super belittling to Plainfield and Adeline on purpose as a commentary on that? Is that what's happening? Because at that point, it's like, well, then I can't look at this separately from my knowledge about Ed Gein. I can't really take it as its own thing. If the way that I can be the most generous to it is by saying that it's making a commentary on how other people have covered the case previously, which means I have to have a fair amount of knowledge about the case to even catch those references and to even be able to think about what it might be trying to do. And to be clear, even if that is the case, even if I can say that the whole thing with her being in New York is like a commentary on how other sources have covered this case and how condescending they can be toward Plainfield, even then I'm like, well, that still doesn't make it okay. You can't just do something yourself and then try to evade criticism for it by claiming that you were providing commentary or you were being satirical. Like, if I punched you in the face and you were like, ow, that fucking hurt, I wouldn't be like, yep, and that was the point. I was providing commentary on how you shouldn't punch people in the face. You're welcome. Can I have my Emmys now? Like, obviously that's fucking stupid. But that's like the only excuse that I think they really have at this point, especially when it comes to the depiction of Bernice Worden. Because this is where I'm like, I do just genuinely feel disgusted by the show. In episode 4, I don't enjoy the show throughout the run of it, but episode 4, when I was rewatching, even being prepared for it, even knowing what was going to happen, I hated it. I hated it so much. I wanted to fast forward through every scene. I couldn't fucking believe what they were doing. And the only excuse I can find is like, maybe that's supposed to be a commentary on how true crime exploits people and changes their stories. I mean, they've taken this beloved member of her community, one of the most popular, well-liked members of the community, and they've made her into someone that, like, I guess the whole town hated because she was a weird home-wrecking whore or something who had venereal diseases. Like, it's so weird. And they also imply that she's addicted to some sort of pill, like some weight loss medication or something. I don't know. It's so bizarre and it's so blatantly disrespectful that it has to be the point for it to be that disrespectful, right? I mean, it's so brazen. It is so outrageous that has to be the point, that they're trying to piss you off. But then it's like, why? But then also, again, it's like, this story just doesn't work on its own merits then, because I have to know things about Bernice Worden to even find it that upsetting. And I do find it upsetting. I mean, again, let's talk about season 1 of Monster. There's the episode with Tony Hughes, who was an actual victim of Jeffrey Dahmer's, but who is portrayed in a very, very different way in the show. But as much as I can say that the show is fucked up for using Tony Hughes' name if they weren't going to portray his story accurately, I do think that that's wrong, especially they very clearly did not get the consent of his living mother. But on the show, it does work well. Like, the episode that they have with Tony, it works well in the narrative because it makes, if you don't know, if you hadn't watched that season, there's just a whole episode with one of Dahmer's victims that's told like from the perspective of the victim, and then Dahmer kills them. And so it's the very kind of like horrifying thing that you feel, where you feel awful, you feel so horrified because you think of Tony as a person, you know? You know the person that Tony was in the show, and then you know that Jeff killed him. And that's when it really becomes clear that Jeffrey Dahmer is like a fucking monster. You know that going in, you see him killing other people, you see him doing it way more graphically, but it's still like, it's just a knowledge that you have of like, this person did these terrible things. It's a feeling you have when you watch him kill someone that you empathize with, that you see as like a real human being. I feel so disgusted watching episode 4 of the Ed Gein story because I know things about Bernice Worden and because I think of her as a real person, that the show decided to do this too. So in this instance, it's not even Ed that's the monster, it's the showrunners that are the monster. And you can say that, oh, well, that's part of the point or whatever, but like, why? Why would you make a show where you're just like, I'm a bad person. Me, the person writing this, the person making this, I suck. I have no morals. Why? Why not just get some morals? Why not just be a better person and make a better show? But then again, it's like, to even get that point, to understand what the show is maybe trying to do and what commentary it's maybe trying to make, you have to know things about Bernice Worden, which most people don't know. Throughout that episode, there's like, it's called Green, and so there's this green light and all these green things that keep happening, and I think that's supposed to like clue you into the fact that it's like fake, or that it's been distorted in some way. But the thing is that even in that specific thing, it's like, why green? Why did they pick green? The only thing that I can think of is that there's a part where they're in the diner where they're like pouring coffee, but then instead of coffee, it's just like, it's a green liquid. And to me, it looks like antifreeze. And so I think all the green in that episode is a reference to the antifreeze. Now, in real life, the reason that Ed got caught, the reason he got arrested, was that he went to Bernice's store the day before he killed her, asking for antifreeze. Also, he had asked Bernice out on multiple occasions, I guess, and she had kept telling him no. Specifically, he had asked her to go roller skating, which is why we have the roller skating rink throughout the entire show. He goes there with multiple people, but especially with Bernice in that episode. So he asks her out multiple times. He asks about antifreeze, and then he also asks Frank if he's going hunting the next day for the first day of open season. And then that's how Ed knows that Bernice is in the store alone. And that's how Frank knows that Ed's the one that did it, because he comes back to the store later, because by the way, in real life, Frank was a co-owner of the store. He was not, him and his mother did not have like this distance relationship or whatever that they're portraying on the show. They were close, they co-owned a store together. Frank comes back to the store. He sees there's a pile of blood, which for some reason in the show is just gone, by the way. Like there's blood on the floor, but then they're like walking through it in the show and they only see it on the wall. Whatever. But he finds the blood, and then he finds that the cash register is gone, but Bernice's like sales sheet for the day and the stuff that she had sold was still there. And the last thing that she had sold before something happened was antifreeze. And Frank was like, oh my God, Ed was buying antifreeze. It was Ed. That's what I think the green is supposed to be referencing, is the antifreeze. But the show never establishes that at all. There's no antifreeze on the show whatsoever. So the only way that you can know that that's the clue that this whole thing is fake, and that like the real story is like leaking in this weird way with this green color, you have to know the thing about the antifreeze yourself so that you can make that connection. And at that point, it's like, does everyone have to do research before they watch a fucking show? What the hell? And now, the thing that everyone who's defending this show will say is that it takes place from Ed's perspective, and that's why nothing makes sense, because it's from the perspective of a guy with schizophrenia, which, first of all, not even kind of, that's pretty offensive. This whole thing of like, well, it's okay for the story to not make sense as long as the main character has a mental illness, then we could just do whatever we want. There doesn't need to be any sort of like through line logic, it's not like Ed's schizophrenia would have had very specific manifestations. No, it just makes everything not make any sense, and in ways that like don't even make sense for a schizophrenic. Like, it's so stupid. This whole thing about like, oh, Ed had schizophrenia. Fuck you. That is not how that works. But then also, no, that's not true. Like, I can't, unless the show is doing something very weird, that's just not supported by the data in the text whatsoever. I mean, I went through every scene that I watched. I was like, I need to like really pay attention to like, what perspective do I think that this is coming through? Because if we're doing this whole unreliable narrator excuse, who's the narrator? Let's establish who the narrator is. And it changes. It changes from episode to episode, which is kind of the problem here. Like, in the first episode, I think it's kind of a more neutral perspective. I mean, you see Ed in the diner and he's weirding these women out, but he doesn't even seem to notice that. So it's like, well, clearly this part must be being told from some sort of like omniscient perspective, This is a third party point of view, and it's someone with a more kind of objective view because they're showing people being grossed out by Ed and him not seeming to like fully get that. So clearly that part is from a third party perspective. So this whole thing about maybe Adeline is a figment of his imagination, she gets introduced in that scene. So I don't think that makes sense. But okay, fine, whatever. I guess you can at least argue that like in those moments where Adeline is with Ed, that's from his perspective, so that's a figment of his imagination or whatever. And there is some stuff that like kind of, they throw enough stuff in there to sort of support that theory, but not really. Like Adeline at one point, she says something, she shows Ed the stuff from the Ilsa Coke lady, and she says, she's real, so she did all of that stuff, which does feel like a kind of intentional nod to like, just because Adeline Watkins' name is real, just because she was a real person, doesn't mean that she did all the stuff that's in this show, which you would think they would want to clarify at what point what she did or didn't do, but they don't do that. They just keep like messing everything up and then trying to say that like it's from Ed's perspective, like that makes it better. Adeline exists in scenes that Ed isn't present in. She has whole scenes with other people. I mean, the whole thing about her going to New York, how is that from Ed's perspective? Ed didn't even seem to fucking care. She's in New York being so cold that her tears are freezing to her face while he's back in Plainfield having sex with Eleanor Adams' body or going to the movies and seeing Christine Jorgensen on the screen. Like, he doesn't seem interested in that part of Adeline's life whatsoever. Why would Ed be fantasizing about it? Why would Ed make that up? Why would he make up the whole conversation that she had with her mother where her mother's telling her that she tried to like abort her because she didn't want to have a kid? But then, okay, fine. All the stuff that Adeline is like independently in, I guess that's all made up by Ed too, somehow. But then in episode 6, I would argue that Frank Warden is very clearly the person through which the entire episode is like based around. Like, episode 6 is from Frank's perspective. And yet, first of all, any excuse about everything that happened with Bernice Warden was just Ed's fantasies, I don't think that's supported by the text because Frank interacts with his mother the exact same way. Like, at the beginning of the story, he is referencing things the same way that she was referencing them in the episode where she has sex with Ed for some reason. And then she also seems like just as messy, just as like drug addicted, whatever. So that's clearly the same character. And then when he finds the crime scene and he goes into the back, instead of seeing any sort of like sales sheet or whatever for antifreeze, he sees a box, a gift that his mom had gotten for Ed that says "To Eddie" on it. Clearly that's the same story between Ed's perspective and now Frank's perspective. That's the same shit. But then even in respect to Adeline specifically, after the funeral, Adeline comes up to Frank and asks him a bunch of questions because she's decided that she's a journalist now. Like, that is so clearly the same fucking character that Ed was interacting with, that Frank is now interacting with. And even then, though, the character that Ed was interacting with by that point was an obnoxious brat, but it's not really the same person that he had been interacting with previously. Adeline's characterization is so fully inconsistent. I mean, it literally changes within like a scene. There's a point where Adeline is in Ed's house and she discovers the corpse that Ed is pretending is his mother, which that doesn't even make fucking sense. Again, like we're talking about the way that they just ignore Plainfield as a whole. Everyone in Plainfield would have known that Augusta Gein died. It doesn't make any sense that he keeps tricking people into thinking that she's alive. It's stupid. But okay, Adeline finds the corpse that Ed is pretending is his mother. She realizes what's happening. She screams, she runs home, and then Ed finds her and she looks like terrified at first. She's in the house and she looks scared. Then Ed walks up the stairs and suddenly she's fine. By the time he gets to the top of the stairs, Adeline is like, actually, I think that was really cool what you did. Would you like my bra and panties? What happened in that time? And even before that, like Adeline was so excited to be engaged and like seemed like she wanted to be a homemaker and wanted to be the domestic force in Ed's life. She was in his house like trying to clean up and stuff and trying to be the woman of the house. And then suddenly, after that, the whole thing where Ed comes up the stairs and she's a different person, now she's not interested in marriage at all. Now she hates the idea of being married. Now she doesn't even really seem to like Ed that much. Before she like really, really wanted to bone him, and that's why Ed had to get a babysitting job or something so that they could fuck. And then he does it, and then she's like, actually, I don't want to have sex with you ever. So it's like, well, what sense does that make? What character is this now? But okay, so which part am I supposed to think is the figment of Ed's imagination? Am I supposed to believe that the woman we met at the beginning of the show, who was a little bit more normal, still kind of weird, but more normal, that was real, and then when Ed comes up the stairs and she's a different person, now the different person is what he's imagining? Why? And again, that different person then has interactions with other people, implying that that person is real. But so then what am I supposed to think? I'm supposed to think that the other version of her is fake? Like, what? But then there are other times where they are kind of playing with this idea of perspective and what's real and what's fake and what parts of this story are true and what parts came from like popular culture and stuff. And even then they're doing it in such a weird fucking way. Like this whole thing, one of the things that really bothered me, and there are many, but one of the things is obviously the way that they portray Robert Bloch and Alfred Hitchcock as having specifically based Psycho on the case of Ed Gein, like to the point where Robert Bloch is like doing research. He knows when Ed was born. He knows all this stuff about him, whatever. And then Alfred Hitchcock is making the Psycho house a direct model, a direct replica of the actual Ed Gein house, which is just very plainly is not. If you've seen the movie, you can like look at it and be like, oh, that's not real. Okay, whatever. It's like, I guess that's fake too. The way that the show is portraying the people telling the story is also fake. Okay, fine, sure, I'll buy that. So that makes me think that everything in the show that we see these filmmakers coming up with, first of all, it doesn't even make sense structurally. Why would you do it the way that they do it? Why would you have it like, here's the Ed Gein story, and then we show Robert Bloch talking about it later as if he's reflecting, he's reporting on the things that already happened, instead of like having... I would have put that part first, put like Robert Bloch and Alfred Hitchcock talking about Psycho, put that first so that that can kind of like lead the audience into, this is all from Robert Bloch's perspective, this is all from Psycho's perspective, and we're pretending that Psycho is actually specifically based on Ed Gein. So you know that like everything that you're seeing is just from the perspective of like the ways that pop culture has influenced our understanding of this story. Okay, sure. Robert Bloch keeps bringing up the fact that Ed had seen these like Nazi photos, these Nazi atrocities. That's why they keep showing us piles of dead Jews over and over again. It's for a purpose. It's for a narrative purpose. They have to keep doing that so that we'll understand the story. So they keep showing us all these photos of the Holocaust, all these photos of like concentration camps just gratuitously, so that they can be like, that's what happened. That's what snapped in Ed's mind. He saw these photos and he was never the same. So I'm like, okay, I get it. I get that that is a theory that Robert Bloch in this universe had. Robert Bloch in real life didn't know anything about the case, so he did not have those kinds of conversations. But okay, sure, in the fiction of this show, this is what's happening. Robert Bloch is the reason that all this Nazi stuff has to be in the show, because that was what he contributed to this idea of the story. Fast forward to when Tobe Hooper is in it, the director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At that point, I'm like, okay, he's now going to introduce a new element, and that's going to explain why this popular idea of Ed exists. It's because it was in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is why people think this thing is true now. Again, it's like, it's so weird too. It's like, thinking about the actual movies, if you're gonna do that, you would do the parts with like Augusta and this idea of Ed having an Oedipus complex from Psycho, not this idea of him being obsessed with World War II and the Holocaust. Like, what does that have to do with Psycho or Ed Gein? I mean, I guess Ed Gein did actually, he did look at those photos, so that part can be there, but it's like, why is Robert Bloch the narrator for that part? Why is Robert Bloch not ushering the points about like Augusta Gein, though the show obviously never even acknowledges that the idea that Augusta was as horrible as she was is also like made up. The show seems to think that that stuff is real, but whatever. Every Ed fucking Gein does an Augusta Gein vilification, so I'm numb to it at this point. But okay, weird for Robert Bloch to be the person bringing up the Nazi stuff. Tobe Hooper talks about it too, though. He's like, yep, Ed, he saw these World War II. I can't do a Texas accent, I'm sorry. Ed saw these World War II images and that fucked him up. It's like, okay, so now we're just repeating the same shit as Robert Bloch. So now we're not even adding new elements into the story from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is so stupid. And then again, it's like, if they're doing this as like, this is where these parts of the narrative came from and this is why you can't trust it, they don't even touch Silence of the Lambs. Not really. It is such an afterthought. There's a scene with Ed talking to Christine Jorgensen where it shows him putting on this vest and dancing in the moonlight or whatever, and then it cuts to this scene from Silence of the Lambs where Buffalo Bill is like dancing and tucking his dick and stuff. And then someone says cut, and then it zooms out on the production of the movie, and then they never touch it again. They do not ever, you know nothing about the production of Silence of the Lambs to such a strange degree, because it's like they spent so much time with Alfred Hitchcock and Anthony Perkins and Robert Bloch in the first couple episodes. So there's a lot about Psycho in there. There's like a little bit about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then there's just like, oh yeah, and also Silence of the Lambs was there too. It's so just thrown together. It's so dumb. But okay, let's throw all these other narrators out the window. Robert Bloch's not narrating anything. Tobe Hooper is not narrating anything. Tony Perkins is not narrating anything. Alfred Hitchcock's not doing it. Like, none of these other people. It's always Ed Gein telling the story. Doesn't really make sense with what we're shown, but okay, let's believe that. It's Ed Gein telling the story, and Ed is schizophrenic, so that means that we can't trust anything he says. He gets treatment for his schizophrenia. It's like kind of implied in the show that he's like essentially cured, not cured, but like effectively treated in Central State Hospital. They give him a pill, and this delusion he had, this is what I'm saying is like, I know this is so incoherent and so unstructured, but at one point they introduce a new nurse named Roz, and it's like, for what? She's in the show for like half a second. She gets introduced because she's like the tougher nurse than the nurse that was nice to Ed. And so Ed has a fantasy about killing her, but then he takes this pill for his schizophrenia, and then suddenly his negative feelings toward Roz completely disappear, and then he hugs her, and then in the next episode, she refers to herself as his friend. So we've just introduced an entirely new character just to have him mad at her for like half an episode, and then have them just be friends, and they just resume the relationship that it seemed like Ed had with the first nurse. So it's like, well, what the fuck was the point of that? The only point that could have is to prove that Ed is now like cured, that he had this issue and he wanted to kill this woman, but he took this pill and now he does it, and now they're friends, and now everything's fine. And then he also makes reference too of like, he doesn't hear voices anymore now. His mother has completely left him, and it doesn't seem like he's lying because he's not getting any sort of like specifically Augusta related hallucinations after he takes that pill. So we're supposed to think that Ed is now like treated. His schizophrenia, his symptoms have completely subsided. And then he solves the Ted Bundy murders. So much happens after he takes that pill that is also like fucked and weird, including like Adeline comes and visits him, and her hair is completely fine. Like, his hair is gray. The makeup to make him look older, not the best. They were half-hearting that one because they still wanted to make him look, hot. And old people aren't hot. But okay, they gave him gray hair. Adeline looks completely normal. She has not aged a fucking day. So I guess we're supposed to take that as like, he's still hallucinating. But then why did you make it seem like he was cured, or that he was in effective treatment? He's now fully hallucinating Adeline. What's happening? And also too, he has a conversation at one point. He has conversations with Ilsa Koch, and then he has conversations with Christine Jorgensen, and it's implied again that that is a hallucination. I mean, it's outright stated that he was hallucinating that because he's talking to them on a ham radio that wasn't even plugged in. But some of it is like stuff that he was talking to his therapist about that's getting integrated into this hallucination he's having. But then some of it is like, well, that's fully separate of anything, though. Ilsa at one point starts just talking like a Nazi, just being like, oh yeah, and then the Jews killed my Fuhrer, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, okay, I don't think the therapist said that. I guess I can believe that that was in Ed's mind, but she's also denying things that Ed thought about her. Like, Ed had this whole thought about all of her crimes and all the stuff that she did from these comics that he was reading, which I think in the show you're supposed to take as that's not even necessarily a realistic depiction of Ilsa. She didn't do all of that stuff, which from the comments that I saw on my own video, that seems to be true. Like, she didn't do a lot of the things that people think she did, but Ed thinks she did because he read these comics. But then in that scene with the ham radio, she's correcting Ed and telling him that a lot of the stuff that people think about her are not true. So, like, is Ed hallucinating that? Ed is fact-checking himself? What? And then also the scene, again, like, there's so much that happens where Ed's not around. The scene continues after Ilsa is done having a conversation with Ed where she's in the cell and it shows her suicide. So, like, is Ilsa's suicide also in Ed's head? What does that mean? And the same thing with Christine. Like, before she gets on the ham radio with Ed, we see her, like, going into the hotel and, like, talking to the other people in the hotel. Did Ed make that up too? The only thing I can think of is, like, it's not just things that would make sense as being from Ed's perspective. The entire show is from Ed's perspective, not just the things that he was involved in. I mean, the fucking show goes on after he died. It shows his headstone being stolen from the cemetery. So even after Ed's dead, we're still seeing everything from his perspective. I guess the only thing we can conclude is that Ed Gein is the writer. The entire show, the whole thing, is from Ed's perspective. Doesn't make any sense in terms of, like, the true crime dramatization aspect of it, because none of that stuff is stuff that Ed even claimed happened. That's just fully made up. Like, Ian is making up new things that Ed thought happened and then blaming those things on Ed. But it's like, why are you writing from the perspective of the serial killer? Why is everything from the perspective of the serial killer, especially? I can understand showing Ed's story from his perspective. I can't really understand you showing the making of Psycho from Ed's perspective, or everything involving Frank. That's all from Ed's perspective too? All of it? It just doesn't make any sense. Or it's like so meta, so unbelievably meta that it's like we're just not ready for it yet. Like, this is too ahead of its time, maybe. It's not. It's a bad show. So don't get that confused. But, like, maybe what the show is trying to do is trying to do something so meta that essentially the show itself is the crime, Ian Brennan is the killer, Ryan Murphy is the overbearing mother of the killer that we can pretty much put all the blame on to. And then we, the audience, are supposed to be the detectives. We're supposed to figure out what it is that they did and why they did it. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's just so fucking meta in a way that no show has ever been. And it still sucks. I mean, it's still like that wouldn't make it a good show, but like maybe it's an explanation. I don't know. The other explanation that I have is that maybe Ian Brennan hates Ryan Murphy. Maybe they've been working together for so long, and Ian he hates what Ryan has become, that he made this show to show him. He made it as like a parody of the first 2 seasons so that he could be like, this is what I think of the show. This is what I think of what you've done. Maybe when I said before that Ryan Murphy needed to see a therapist, maybe Ian and Ryan need to see a couples counselor, and this is just like a domestic dispute that they have chosen to involve everybody else in. I don't know. I don't know why they did this. Let me just get out some of these other feelings, these other observations that I had, just to hopefully be done with this. One thing, again, just talking about like symbolism that I don't fully understand, but like maybe I can kind of get what they're doing. There's a lot of close-ups of chewed gum. There's one point when they're in the diner and he sets his gum down on like an ashtray or something, and they do a close-up on it. There's another point where right before he kills Mary, he puts his gum onto a mirror. There's such an emphasis on the gum that I'm like, that must mean something, but what does it mean? The only thing I can think of is like he keeps saying over and over again, in case it has any flavor or something, like I'm keeping it in case it has flavor. And that is true. Like Ed did have, because he was like a hoarder, he had like a jar or a can where he just put a bunch of chewed gum into it. So that part's kind of true, but like I don't know what it's supposed to represent in the show, other than maybe that's supposed to be reflective of his obsession with dead bodies, that it's like the same as chewed gum. I mean, that's a weird allegory to make, but okay, sure. I noticed that there was a lot of cups of milk around, and that could either be like it's the milk just because it's Wisconsin, and just the cows, or maybe it's supposed to represent like a mother's milk, because of his mommy issues. I'm not sure. There's one point in the therapist office where his doctor specifically tells him to take the pills with water, and he's like, here, water will help. And it's like, oh, is that supposed to be like he was drinking milk before and now he's drinking, like, what does that mean anything, or am I reading too much into that? I'll never know. There's also a part in episode 2 where Robert Bloch and Alfred Hitchcock are having dinner, and then his wife's there, and then his wife at some point gets upset or like annoyed, or she just doesn't like that this movie is being made or something. She thinks it's gross. She gets up and then she walks out of the dinner scene, and then it shows her like going upstairs. It shows her from another angle, like she's walking out of the room, and then she either says something to the maid that's there, or the maid says something to her. There's some sort of interaction there, and then there's like dogs, and then they go upstairs, and I'm like, what? What does that mean? Why did we film that? You can be like, oh, she's just going upstairs, that's all that means. It's like, but they put a camera there. They lit that scene. They had a woman in a maid outfit. Like there's a lot of effort going into just showing her going upstairs, when we could have just watched her exit the room and we would have understood what was happening the exact same way. So like why did we have to show that part? Now I feel like I maybe understand what the opening of episode 2 is doing now. At the time, I just thought it was really weird because it's just Ed out on his land on like some farm equipment, and then he sees like Holocaust victims running past him, and then he goes in his house and he's like, they're gonna get me or something, or they know what I've done. I don't remember what he says, something like that.
They know about me. They know what I've been doing. They found me.
What I think that scene is supposed to represent now, on my second viewing, I think it's that he's identifying with Ilsa Koch, and so he feels about his bodies, the bodies he's taking from cemeteries. He has anxieties around those coming to find him the way that Ilsa Koch would have anxieties around victims of the Holocaust coming to find her. I think that's what that's supposed to be referencing, but I still think that was a weird thing to show regardless. And even then, even taking that into account and being like, okay, he's identifying with Ilsa Koch, I still don't understand why the scenes with her go on for so long and why we spend so much time with her. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like, again, I'm trying to give the show as much grace as possible. So I'm like trying to read into stuff where I'm like, what does it mean? At one point, she's having a party and she comes out and she's telling her children not to touch a wolf because it might bite. And I'm like, what does that mean? Is that symbolic for something? And then she goes to her other daughter and she's telling her daughter that she needs to take turns on the little like pony or whatever she's riding. It's like, okay, taking turns, don't let the wolf bite you. What is that an allegory for? What are we doing? But I think it maybe just doesn't mean anything, and it's just supposed to be confusing so that they can pretend that, if you don't get it, you just don't get it. And I think it just probably just didn't mean anything. They do also a lot of stuff with like the monster is us, or there's a point where Anthony Perkins is being like, oh my God, you can't do that to Ed. He's like, oh, the stuff you're making is so gross. Stop. And then Ed in this hallucination that I guess Anthony Perkins is having, but I guess maybe that's Ed Gein hallucinating, Anthony Perkins hallucinating, Ed Gein, I don't know. But Anthony is talking to Ed in this hallucination, and then Ed says, "You're the one that can't look away." And it's like, okay, so you're trying to do this whole thing of like, oh yeah, maybe the show is fucked up because we keep showing terrible things that we arguably should not have shown anybody, but you're still watching, aren't you? And it's like, yeah, those aren't the same thing though. There is just this kind of gross nihilistic outlook that the show seems to have where it's like, people kill people, then other people make media about it, and then other people watch that media about it, and that's all the same. Like, it's all equal levels of bad. We're all hypocrites. It's like, I don't think so. I don't think that those are the same. I think that, like, actually you can have moral standards. You can even still be a hypocrite. You can be a hypocrite and be like, okay, yeah, I watched the show, and maybe watching the show, there's some degree of badness within that. Like, I've contributed to something that is negative. I've watched the show. I've personally obviously made videos about the show. You could say that I'm promoting it in some way because of that. Like, okay, yeah, sure. There's things within that where you can be like, okay, maybe there's some stuff that's fucked up. Maybe this is not a totally ethical decision to make, but it's like, well, it's still not worse than making it. Like, making the show, definitely, that's a way more severely bad decision to make. That's a way more immoral decision to make. Like, we're not the same. And then also, you're not the same as Ed Gein. Like, just because people kill people and then other people make TV shows about it, those aren't the same. What are we doing? This whole, like, morality really doesn't exist, so it's fine. What? They also do a whole thing. I still don't really understand what the point of the Anthony Perkins Alfred Hitchcock stuff is supposed to be, because there's all this shit about like secrets make us sick or whatever, and Tony identified with Ed because he's also keeping a secret, even though those secrets are definitely not comparable. But okay, secrets are holding us back or whatever. And then also a few of the directors, like Alfred Hitchcock and Tobe Hooper, the two directors we get to see because we don't see anything from Silence of the Lambs, but they're both convinced that their job as horror directors is to show the like underlying darkness that all of humanity has, you know, the cruelty of the human condition or something, that like this sits below the surface of all of us. And if we don't have an outlet to express it, like through movies or whatever, then that's when all the bad stuff happens. It's like a very Freudian idea that they kind of play with a little bit, but then they also seem to completely drop. And so I'm like, was I supposed to take that as the perspective of the show? Or was the show critiquing it? It doesn't feel like it's really doing either. It feels like it's just kind of bringing it up and then just being like, who cares? Also, yeah, the stuff with the like gynophilia shit, people were pointing out in my comment section, and yeah, rewatching the scene, it is really like, it is just straight like turf talking points, but coming from a trans woman. And I get that they're just trying to deny the idea that Ed is trans, which they could do many other ways. For instance, actually looking at the evidence of the case and seeing that the whole thing about him identifying as a woman is just kind of made up. They could have done that, but instead they chose to keep all the elements in there that make you think that he does identify as a woman, just to be like, but he actually doesn't, he's just a pervert. But using talking points that so easily could be lobbied at actual trans people, and actual trans people who did not do the things that Ed Gein did. But sure, they did the bare minimum, I guess, of establishing that Ed wasn't really trans, but they still chose to do it in the most like transphobic way possible. Ay. Oh, I also, there's another close-up when the FBI is questioning Ed. It closes up on their cigarette getting lit, and I was like, what does that even mean? And then I thought about it, and I was like, are they implying that the FBI gave Ed cancer? Is that what that's supposed to mean? I also still, I can't show it because of the things that are happening in that scene, but there is just some weird editing choices being made in episode 8 when Ted Bundy is like sawing a girl's head off, and it keeps like, it'll show him for a second and then it'll go to black, and then it'll like show him for another second and then it'll go to black, and it's like, okay, I don't understand it at all. Like, you didn't even have to show the close-up in the first place, but also if you're gonna cut to another thing, it seems weird to just cut to black. Like, I don't know. It's so weird, and it's so weirdly paced. And I wish I could show it, but I don't think I can show that on YouTube. But it is, listen, if you're gonna watch the show at all, and if you're like okay with violent stuff, go watch the like opening of episode 8 and find that part where Ted is like about to saw the head off. I don't understand what the choice was there. I don't get it. I don't understand why they gave Evelyn Hartley polio. I've tried to think about it. I've like thought about it from a million different angles. I guess maybe it just makes her more vulnerable, but she was a 15-year-old girl, so that doesn't seem necessary. Like, what do you mean? She's a 15-year-old. Obviously, she's fucking vulnerable. You don't have to have polio. Because they said that she was in the hospital and that's why she couldn't babysit the kids on that like one day. I mean, there's a million other things you can have her busy doing that's not polio. That was just bizarre. I don't even get it. Like the stuff with Bernice, it feels almost intentional. It feels like they're trying to fuck up Bernice's story just for fun or just like to rub it in, just to like make some point about, I guess, true crime's unreliability or whatever and how it exploits victims by exploiting a victim. I guess you could say that, but the stuff with Evelyn, it's like, well, what did that even add to the story at all? What would her having polio, what would that affect? It doesn't affect anything. It's just a weird thing to make up about somebody. Another really strange but also like kind of funny decision is, and I pointed it out in my video reactions, they have Richard Speck with his fucking tit over Ed's shoulder during this like reading of this letter that Richard Speck never fucking wrote him, but he has him over Ed's shoulder and he goes,
"Choke your chicken to these titties."
And then Ed is like pondering it for a second, and then the show just fades out, and then it goes to the next scene. But it's like, what is the fade out? We haven't had any fade outs in the entire show, and that's what we fade out on? Choke your chicken to these titties? I mean, it is funny. Like, I still, going back, episode 4 is the episode that I have the most problem with because I find that the most upsetting. Episode 8 is the most ridiculous and it's the dumbest, but in a way I almost like that episode the most. Like, that's the episode that to me, at least it commits to the bit, you know? Like, Ed is solving the Ted Bundy murders by knowing what kind of saw Ted would have been using and also knowing the level of horsepower that Volkswagens have. It's so stupid, which kind of makes it funny to me. And like with all the serial killers at the end telling him how much they admire him, it's like it is funny. So in a way, maybe they pulled it off in the end by making something so stupid that I think it's supposed to undermine whatever the rest of the show is. I just know that at least by the end of the show, I was like, well, I guess they did it. They made me watch this whole thing just so that they could fucking laugh in my face about it, I guess. That's what it felt like. It felt like they just made something so stupid so that at the end they could be like, don't you feel dumb now that you watched all of that? And it's like, yeah, I do, but why did you make it? And why are you continuing to make it? They're making another season. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't know what else to say. I don't know what conclusion to give. I don't know what the point of any of that was. I don't really understand what I watched. I hope I don't ever have to watch it again, but it's possible that I will. I don't know. I'm gonna let it simmer for a second, but I am gonna answer because I said that I would answer questions if anyone had them. And also, apologies, by the way, if I missed any of your questions, especially if your question was good. YouTube just doesn't show me all the same comments that it used to. I don't really understand what's up with YouTube, but I have to like turn off filters and sort by new just to see comments in a way that I didn't have to before. And it's like they highlight comments that aren't even like, they're not always nice comments, you know? Like if it was just filtering the comments more to just show me stuff that's nice, that'd be one thing, but it's definitely not. So apologies if I missed your question, but here's what I got. What is your overall rating of the show, also taking into consideration of the 2 previous seasons? I think season 1, probably like a 6 out of 10. Season 2, 3 out of 10. Season 3 is 1, I guess, if I have to give it a number. So 10 out of 30. 1 out of 3. Who do you think in the show gives the best performance? In this season, I guess Charlie Hunnam. I mean, the voice he's doing is awful, and he also can't hold a Wisconsin accent whatsoever, but he's the one tasked with leading the show, so he did have more on his plate, and I think he like accomplished what it was that was asked of him. But I don't think anyone gave like a totally awful performance. I did think that Addison Rae's performance wasn't very good, but she's got a great debut album, so that's what matters. But everyone else, it's like, yeah, that's the thing that's frustrating about these fucking Ryan Murphy shows. He gets some of the best actors in the business and then makes them do this. So yeah, I didn't think anyone's performance was terrible. I didn't even think Addison's was that bad. I just think it was probably the worst of the show. What digital media do you think is a good representation of Ed Gein? There's not much. There is a documentary that was made that I think is the best documentary, and that is Clive Barker's A to Z Horror. You can find it on YouTube, I believe. I know for sure you can find it on archive.org, but yeah, if you're going to watch any sort of Ed Gein-related media, I would suggest that. Have you watched the documentary Psycho, The Lost Tapes of Ed Gein? I'd love to know your opinions if you've watched it. Yes? I have watched it. I talk about it a lot in the video that I'm working on, so I'm not gonna like go into a whole lot of detail now, but let's just say it's not my favorite. What would you say was the most heinous crime against facts and reality committed by Murphy and Co. in this show, if it's even possible to choose just one? I mean, the character assassinations of Bernice Worden and Adeline Watkins was pretty heinous. I hate the way that the show implies that the movies that have been inspired by Ed Gein were so specifically based off of him by people that actually knew stuff about him, especially Psycho. It's because this idea that Robert Bloch based Norman Bates off of Ed Gein is so pervasive that it just bothers me even more to see the show reinforcing that idea, because it's just not true. And I think that like a lot of the current idea that a lot of people have of Ed Gein is just based on Norman Bates and this idea that Norman is based on Ed Gein. So I think that like the connection between Psycho and the Ed Gein narrative, that has done a lot of damage in and of itself to perpetuate a false story. But, there's a lot. There's a lot that the show did wrong that I find troubling, but I guess those two things. What are some resources you recommend people read if they want to learn the actual facts of the Ed Gein case? The only book I've ever heard is any good is the one by Judge Golmar. Yeah, Judge Golmar, as exploitative as that book is and as fucked as the book was to publicize those images of Bernice, that probably is the best book if you're looking for something that's like written out, like a secondary source. That's probably the best one because it's the most kind of like factual retelling. But even then, Judge Golmar gets into a whole lot of weird speculation too. And there's some stuff he says where I'm like, I'm not totally sure that that's what happened, but he was the judge on the case. And so he did have access to all the primary sources that were presented to the court. So that's something. Where can one read Ed Gein's psych evaluations? There are some transcripts that are in Judge Golmar's book, so you can read some of those there. I have them from a book published by John Borowski that's called The Ed Gein Files, A Psycho's Confession in Case Documents. You can get them from that. The really kind of frustrating thing about researching Ed Gein, which the show does not comment on whatsoever, even though it has every right to, and you would think that it would given the rest of the subject matter. But part of the reason that it's hard to research Ed's case is because so few of the actual case documents have been made fully public. They have mostly just gone around in murderabilia circles, different murderabilia auction websites, eBay for a while, and also collections like John Borowski's book, which John Borowski does do books like that are case files from actual serial killer stuff. But it's treated as if it's a collector's item, as if it's like a murderabilia thing, instead of just being, primary sources on a public interest story. Are there photos of the artifacts found on Gein's home available online? Some, not a whole lot though. Most of the photos that we have from Ed's house came from just newspapers, just reporters going into the house, taking photos and then publishing them. Those reporters went into the house after all of the main, big crime stuff got taken out and taken to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. So we mostly just have photos of, the house and, the state of dirtiness that was in it. And then we have some photos of the detectives actually taking stuff out of the house. Like, we have some photos of them carrying the chairs that had skin coverings on them. There's some photos of, a purse that they were holding, where I guess, the purse strings were made of skin as well. But then we don't really have a whole lot of photos from the stuff that was taken to the crime lab once it was there. And there is some stuff where, people have claimed that they were from Ed's house, but I don't know if that's true. There's a photo of gloves that people say were from his home that were made of skin. I don't know the origin of those photos. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is gloves made of skin, but they weren't made by Ed Gein. Maybe they were. I don't know where anyone would have gotten them, because once the crime lab wrapped up their investigation, they buried all of it. They buried everything that was found in Ed Gein's house in an unmarked grave. And unmarked is the key word there. There is a grave that people claim is the grave that holds all the stuff from Ed's house. I don't think that it is. I think that's a different memorial site for lost soldiers. I don't know for sure if that's true, but I believe that is the case, but I've never gotten confirmation. But a lot of people will claim that marked spot is where the parts from what was found in Ed's house were buried. I don't believe that that's true. But yeah, anything that you find online that's claiming to be from Ed's house, hard to say. Just hard to say. Do you think they didn't want to show the car at the county fair because it would require them to reflect on their own exploitation of the Gein story? No. No, I don't think that they care. I think that they're fine with them exploiting the story, because I think that they're doing this thing of we can always point it back at the audience because they're watching it, so they're just as bad. No, I don't think that they really thought that much about it. I think that, they just didn't feel like shooting it. That's the only thing I can come up with, is they just didn't want to. They had scenes with Ilsa Koch to film. Do you think there's any chance that parts of this show were written with AI? I mean, I couldn't say for sure. I don't know. It to me, it feels fucked up and dumb in a way that's only a human could do. Because I almost think that an AI-generated thing would follow more consistent beats or something. This is just too weird. I can't even put this on a robot. And then you mentioned there was some circumstantial evidence that Ed Gein might have had accomplices. This turned my understanding of the case on its head entirely. I was wondering if you could elaborate or even do some informed speculation on the whole subject. Well, so there's a lot of reasons. I mean, they're not a lot of reasons. There's a few reasons. The big reason is just that Ed's case was not investigated to the full extent that it should have been. It was barely investigated at all. So it's anything is possible is kind of the big thing. We don't know. I mean, that's the same thing with the Evelyn Hartley case. Do we know that Ed was connected to that at all? No. Do I think that he was? Probably not. Is there a possibility? Yeah. I don't think it was ever discounted to a degree that would say for sure that he didn't do that. Same thing with Victor Travis and Ray Burgess. I think it's more likely that he killed them than he killed Evelyn Hartley, but all of it is just something that we'll never know because they didn't really investigate it. But the thing with the accomplice, I talk about it a little bit in my video. It was, I don't know what it'll be now that this fucking thing has come out, but it was a video with 4 parts plus a prologue, so kind of 5 parts. Part 1 I already have finished, and also the prologue, and those are up to watch on my main channel, the main Medusini channel for members. If you purchase a membership for the channel, you can go watch those right now. You can also watch a version of the prologue with the narration track muted on this channel. You won't know what's going on, but you could watch it, technically. But I put those videos up on my main channel for members, so you can't watch those unless you purchase a membership. But before I put the full part 1 up, I did put chapter 1 of part 1. There's 3 chapters. I put chapter 1 up for members as an unlisted video, and then I just put up like the link on a member's post. So technically, if you would like to watch chapter 1, all you need is the link. You don't need to be a member. You just need to get the link. I don't know that chapter 1's going to make a whole lot of sense if you don't watch the prologue. I think it probably mostly will, but maybe there'll be a few things that you don't understand. But I'll put chapter 1, the link, in the description. You can go watch that if you want. If you want to continue watching and you want to watch the entirety of part 1 and you want to watch the prologue as well, then you can get a membership, or you can just wait until I finish the entirety of the video and then I'll upload the whole thing for the public. But if you specifically, you just want to know about the accomplice stuff, I talk about it a little bit at 20 minutes and 16 seconds in to chapter 1 in the link that is in the description. So you can go watch that if you would like. And I don't know. I guess I hope I am now done talking about that TV show. But I guess we'll see.